I'm going to have shorter office hours than I normally do. Today I have a doctor's appointment for a follow-up at foot surgery during the break. So my appointment's like at 10:15. So if you need to see me, do it right after my next class. So just call me. We can talk if you have questions, or start tomorrow. We can. Feels like I've been out of the game for a while. Next up is we are starting Unit 4, which is how muscles influence motion. I'm going to, at the end of class, I'll leave a few minutes open if y'all have any questions about Unit 3 stuff. But like I said, 20 minutes ago, you can only do so many examples before, and we'll still have our standard review before the test, and my helpers are going to do some review stuff. But we've done that a lot, right? So, guys, the end of the semester is literally like here. Like after your third test, we have like 2 weeks or less before our final, so we kind of have to start on the new stuff. Okay. So, any questions about class? Just any kind of things that we need to talk about. Your final, that's all on Moodle, or everything's updated on Moodle. Hopefully those old lectures are helping too, okay? All right, we close the door and we'll get started. One thing I have to remind not only you guys but myself is that you're majoring in kinesiology. You're learning about human movement, and movement. Bones articulate to become joints. Joints have movement possibilities, and then muscles influence those motions, right? The issue is that illusion stuff with the ankles and the stuff that we've kind of taught our whole lives or verbalized our whole lives, and we have bad habits, that the stuff that we're about to talk about, anybody can practice, right? Like, anybody can get a gym membership and exercise and use muscles to influence their motion. And so a lot of the bad verbiage or lack of understanding is, imagine a machine and there's movements on the machine, and the machine is going to say, this machine targets, but they can't like literally say, this hamstring curl targets the gastrocnemius proximally, the semimembranosus, the semitendinosus, the biceps femoris, the sartorius, the gracilis, the popliteus, right? like in a partridge and a pear. You know what they're going to say? Your hamstring. But what are the hamstrings, and are they alone? Do they have help? Targets the quads. Okay, who are the quads? Are there any differences between the quads? Are they all equal parts? This exercise works my bicep. That's cool. Is it alone? Is there other muscles that help? So the reason they have it is for ease of use. You want to be like, this exercise targets your bicep, your brachioradialis, your brachialis, your teres major, right? It's too much. So understand there's a reason they simplify it, because probably 90-something% of the people that use it don't have kinesiology degrees. But it's also why it gets in the way of us understanding how things work, because we have these bad habits. And specifically, the biggest bad habit, you're going to hear me say a lot, 5 lots, is that muscles, although they influence motion, their function or their purpose, some textbooks say action, is not specifically tied to one joint motion. The bicep doesn't flex the elbow. It can, but I can have elbow flexion because of my tricep. True. I can have elbow extension because of my bicep. I can have no motion because of my bicep. If I turn it off. So we cannot tie a specific muscle to a specific motion. It's easy to memorize, right? And it's something we want to do because we're just, oh, this muscle, this motion, this muscle. It makes memorizing easy. But that's not how muscles work, okay? So that's the biggest thing that students kind of have a tough time with this lecture, is because your instinct is to want to say, this muscle does this motion. In addition, if all we ever say is this is a bicep exercise, you ever see any people watch the Disney movie Coco, where like you die 2 deaths, your physical death, and then when people no longer know who you are, or you get lost to history, that you die a second death. So think about it. If you come from, anybody have more than 3 siblings? Anybody come from a big family? Lord, put your hands down. It's giving me anxiety. At my household, we had a brother and a sister, and everybody always talked about my brother. They were older than me, but my brother, and you kind of feel like, you know, like you never get mentioned. So if all we ever do is just say bicep, 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 all the other muscles that are like, well, I'm doing some of this work too. And some of those muscles are underneath the bicep, so they kind of get hidden. Right? So the bicep's more what we call superficial, more over the top. You have these big country living muscles that live out in the country, and our football coach used to call them show me muscles. But you see them out of sight, out of mind. So you have a lot of other muscles that are really important. In fact, the biceps brachii isn't even the most important muscle of that group. The one that lives underneath it is even more powerful than it. But it gets hidden, and it never gets talked about. So it kind of gets lost to history. For every single person in this room, you're going to be working with people. A lot of you are going to be doing therapy. A lot of you are going to be doing personal training, athletic training, whatever your niche, you're going to have to know the spectrum of muscles and how they function. Okay? Because what if someone has an injury to a specific muscle that's not the bicep? What if someone has a problem with a specific hamstring? And if all we do is say bicep, tricep, quads, hams, glutes, like generalizing, okay? So the 2 biggest points, muscles are not directly associated with a specific motion. And we can't generalize muscles based off of the all-stars or based off on one particular muscle. In other words, one muscle doesn't speak for the whole group. There's always multiple muscles involved in any influence of motion, always. The only muscles that work by themselves are the heart, and that's not a skeletal muscle. So we don't care. We don't care in terms of our class is about skeletal muscles influencing our motion, right? You go to choreology school, big care. So the heart and the diaphragm, again, not our problem. Every movement you have that was because of muscles that you did had multiple muscles involved. It's never just one. Okay? The second point that I'd like to make, if I could get the screen up. Yoink. I bet you someone, a while back, I had the, what do you call it, where it wouldn't go blank after a while because like it kept going off. I guess it's battery safe or screen safe. It's like doing it like every 2 minutes. All right. The second thing I need you guys to understand, to accept as truth, is that muscles influence motion through the context of contractions. Big, big important thing here. Muscles can influence motion, but through the context of contractions, how they contract. Okay? An example of what I'm trying to say is the biceps flexes the elbow only through concentric contraction. But the biceps can also be responsible for extending the elbow as it lowers it down, right? When you're doing curls, it's the same muscle, you feel it. So the bicep can do extension when it's working eccentrically. Do you see what I'm getting here? Or if you're holding a position, the bicep can maintain that joint position and not let gravity extend me through the context of isometric contraction. So it's like an equation. We're going to work towards that equation later. But you have to have all three variables when talking about muscles influencing motion. These muscles influence these specific motions through these specific contraction types. Make sense? Okay. So I have a little something here for context. How many muscles in the body? The correct answer is a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot of variables. And some you got two of, most of them you got two of, a right and a left. And some people have, there's certain muscles, like little weak, feeble muscles, kind of like appendix, like some people have, some people don't in certain percentages, but it's a lot of variables. How many joint motions? A lot. Good Lord, we spent 3/4 of class talking about joint motion. That's a lot. And then you have three types of contractions, right? Eccentric, concentric, isometric. We're going to learn. I'm going to teach you what that really means. I know you kind of know what it means from a memorization standpoint. I'm going to teach you what that really means so that you can apply it infinitely many ways. But that's a lot of variables. It's a lot of variables. So I'm going to help simplify it and bring context to it so that we can apply it. So you guys agree that like start to finish, right? If I ask this to my father, he'd be, oh, Shay, you working your bicep. And he's not wrong, right? But Dad, did you ever think there's other muscles that help out the bicep? Why don't we ever talk about those guys? Or what about my wrist extensors that are maintaining this position while I bring it up, right? Because if those guys turn off, my wrist is going to flex. Like, there's a lot of stuff happening here. That's why you give, like, there's types of contractions where stabilizers and neutralizers and prime movers, and there's different roles, there's different jobs that these muscles undertake. Okay? But again, think about it. If all I ever did was say, ooh, that's flexion, bicep. Then on the test, when I say, well, what happens when this person goes from start to finish? About 25% of you, not you guys because you're here in class, you're going to get it right. But maybe some people who say, I already know all this stuff. I'm already a certified personal trainer. I know how to exercise. I'm telling you, I'm going to ask this question on the test, and it sounds silly, but I know why they miss it. I'm going to say start, finish, and they're going to say tricep. Because the tricep extends the elbow. No context of contraction. No, why would you need your tricep? You already got gravity that's trying to extend you. If you actually use that muscle, you would snap your arm off. There's no reason. That's like saying, if I'm in an elevator, we're going to get to that analogy eventually. I'm on the 10th floor and I want to go down, so I need to yank the elevator down. Of course not. You're still going to use something that pulls up, and you're going to allow yourself to go down at a nice, comfortable speed that you choose. But the thing that was pulling up let you go down. Just because I went down doesn't mean something was yanking me down. Common sense? Cool. So this is my warning. Do not associate a specific muscle with a specific motion. In fact, think of it like this. You're going to be right 1/3 of the time. Only in concentric contractions. Only, in other words, for the curl, I'm going to have my biceps are going to be responsible for the flexion. If I hold it in this position, it's still working, right, isometrically. And then if I lower it down, it's going to be working eccentrically. So that tells me that only 1/3 of the time in those three scenarios, the bicep is flexing my elbow. Like more often than not, it won't be. It won't be having any motion in isometric, and it's going to be allowing motion in the opposite direction in eccentric. But people do it because it's easy and it's convenient, right? So the problem with the term muscle action, and there's some textbooks, there's some reference, and this is semantics. I'm explaining why the people on kind of my side of the argument choose what we choose. You'll either hear muscles talked about it's basically purpose. What do? And some source materials will say action. Other people like me like to use the word function. The reason we don't like the word action, and it's totally semantical, is because it infers movement. Like, think about a director going, and action, like it infers movement. But we've established that muscles can work isometrically and there's no motion at all. You don't have to have motion for muscles to be working or to be doing a job. Does that make sense? So function is a term that we're going to use. And the function of muscles isn't to produce a specific joint motion, it's to pull in a specific direction of joint motion. Again, super semantical, but extremely important. The elevator is called an elevator because it doesn't just bring you up. It keeps you from falling down, and it also lets you go down at a nice, comfortable speed. The elevator is called an elevator because that cable influences motion by pulling up. It always pulls up. It's about its direction of pull, not the motion that's happening, because you go up and down. Muscles have function based off of their direction of pull, not because of a specific motion. Make sense? Another cool thing about muscles are, simpler the better for me. Muscles can only pull. That's all they can do. Muscles only pull. Those little cilia, those little actin and myosin, that's all pull force. That's tension. And intuitively, you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. How am I able to squat? I'm pushing on the ground or I'm pushing on the bar. Your bones can push. There's no problem with that. But your bones are pushing because muscles are pulling. Meaning if I'm pushing against a bar, it's because I have muscles that are pulling on the bone, and thus the bone is pushing on. Does that make sense? So your hands can push on things. Your hands are not muscles. Your feet can push on things. Your feet are not muscles. Does that make sense? Muscles can only pull. To illustrate that, I kind of have a couple little silly examples. Watch. Yoink. The TheraBand can only pull. So I can influence motion by pulling, but you know what I can't do? I can't influence motion by pushing. I can't push the joint and influence its motion. I can only pull to influence motion. It's a really weird segue, but I think it works. Think about a puppet master. You know the little puppeteers, right? The strings on the puppeteer, all influenced by pull force, okay? We, as humans, are incredible puppets because we have something that those puppeteers and those puppets don't have. The puppeteers, their strings only pull up. If you think about it, the strings only pull up. So they can make the puppet go up, but they have to let the puppet's movements go down or let gravity do it down. They can't yank them down. We have strings that pull in every direction of motion. I can yank my arm down, unlike the puppet, because the puppeteer can't push the arm down with the string. If you push a segment down, that's called a muppet. You ever seen those puppets that have the sticks? Muscles can only pull. So because muscles can only pull, it makes sense that we need strings in every direction of motion that we have. It makes sense why we have muscles in the front and the back, on the side, on the inside. Like we have to cover all of our bases so that our puppet can pull in every direction of motion. And that pull is preventing motion sometimes, creating motion sometimes, and allowing motion sometimes through the context of contraction. This is just an introduction, guys. I'm going to teach you how all this stuff works, and y'all are going to be some masters by the finals time. I have an example of why verbiage is so important for my students. So if you went and searched biceps brachii on the old Googler, you'll have things like its origin, its insertion, but then you'll have something called action. And look, supinates forearm and flexes forearm. Now, that's layman's terms. We understand what they mean is radial, the joint and elbow. Right? But again, give that some thought. Supinates forearm. Every time. So what it's setting up two errors with that one statement. This muscle does this motion. The first error is, anytime I see that motion, I'm going to think it's that muscle. And anytime I'm using that muscle, I must be seeing this motion. It's never through the context of contraction. So, to make that a true statement, we'd have to say the biceps brachii, and I'm just going to take out forearm because I just can't say it. The biceps brachii supinates the radial ulnar joint when it's working concentrically. And flexes the elbow when it's working concentrically. But we just established it can extend the elbow when it's working eccentrically, and it can prevent gravity from extending my elbow when it's working isometrically. It's still working, it's still doing a job. I can't hold this position forever, I'm gonna get tired. I can't hold this position forever, I'm gonna get tired. It's working, it's contracted, doing a job. So what we do is we say, what's the function? Because at least function doesn't infer movement. What's its purpose? What does it do all the time? Even when you're sleeping, even when you're dead, that muscle pulls in a certain direction of motion. With the understanding that it's going to influence motion through different contractions. The context of contraction. So for function, we want directional pull. The biceps brachii is an elbow flexion puller, or as what we say, elbow flexion. It pulls in the direction of elbow flexion, regardless of if it's working concentrically, regardless of if it's working eccentrically, regardless of if it's working isometrically, regardless if you're playing on TikTok, whether you're sleeping, that muscle always pulls that way because that's how it crosses the elbow. It's what it always does. It always pulls that way. When you're flexing the elbow through concentric contraction, it's pulling in a direction of flexion. When you're letting the elbow extend because of eccentric contraction, it's pulling in the direction of flexion. When you're holding this position because of isometric contraction, it's pulling in the direction of elbow flexion. When you're at rest, it pulls in the direction of elbow flexion. How do I know? Because if you snip that tendon, that muscle would roll up. If you rupture it, that muscle is rolling up because it's always pulling. That's what tone is, resting tone. Your muscles will always have resting tone. So it's muscles influence motion by their direction of pull. That's how we talk about their function. What do they do? And to me, that's not only true, it's comforting. It's comforting to know I don't have to say the bicep is an elbow flexor when it's concentric, but it's an elbow extender when it's eccentric. Then you got people jumping categories. This is sometimes of that, and that's sometimes of this. If we do it based off its directional pull, it's all the time. Then all we have to learn is the context of contraction to see how this muscle pulling in a specific direction can be responsible for these joint motions when they're contracting certain ways. The elevator makes you go up through concentric elevator contraction. The elevator keeps you on the same floor while you get off through isometric elevator contraction. And the elevator lets you go down through eccentric elevator contraction. Guys, in all three scenarios, that thing was influencing motion by pulling up the same way. Making you go up by pulling up, keeping you from falling to your death by pulling up, and letting you go down by pulling up. You see what I'm getting at? You smell what the rock is cooking? So here's an example. I have two examples of what I'm getting at, okay? From left to right, this should be some consistent verbiage for us. Left to right, we have elbow flexion. Right to left, we have elbow extension. All we're doing is adding the context of muscles and the context of contraction. Now, I know right away, you're like, Campbell, you're kind of being a hypocrite. You just said we can't look at muscles by themselves, but here I am doing it. I'm trying to plant the seed of how this stuff is going to work before we get into how we're going to name the muscles based off of teams and groups. What I mean by saying is that Michael Jordan was part of the Chicago Bulls, but for these examples, I'm just going to say Michael Jordan. Okay? Until we get the hang of it, and then we could say Chicago Bulls. Biceps brachii influences elbow flexion from left to right through concentric contraction. Biceps brachii influences elbow extension from right to left through eccentric contraction. Biceps brachii holds each position in both photos through isometric contraction. So that's another thing, is that some students, if they don't see motion, they don't think that a muscle's doing a job. And that's preposterous. Our muscles do tons of jobs isometric. Make sense? Context of contractions, guys. We have to have context of contractions. So I think this second example is great because if we notice, and again, I'm using these examples because your body knows the physics of this stuff. We had flexion from left to right, and we know it was bicep. And we had extension from right to left. We also know it was bicep. But look, we have the same motions happening here. I have flexion from left to right, but I know it's not bicep. Hey, the word has tricep in it. But if you learn this muscle does this motion, and that's all you learn, remember those illusions we talk about? Then someone's going to be like, oh, I must be working bicep because I see flexion. Make sense? One of the things I keep repeating over and over, we cannot assume, we cannot assume, we cannot assume. And one of the reasons I say that is because we have so many bad habits etched in our minds. And I try to explain why we have those bad habits. That I can't practice law without a law degree. But anybody could go to the gym and practice fitness, as they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but it gets these bad habits in our heads. We need to know better. We need to understand how muscles influence motion through contractions. My dad doesn't have to understand that. The people you're working with may not understand that, but you have to. We have to. Am I setting up the problem well enough? Like we understand like what we're getting at? Okay? So why do so many resources state that the action of a specific muscle is a specific motion? Because it's easy to learn. It's easy to memorize. It's easy to teach. But it's not right. It's not right. I said this one on the first day of class. I just think it's hysterical. You know, when we're kids, like flex your muscles, right? You know, so we've been having these these mixed up verbiages implanted in us since we were kids. Muscles don't flex, muscles contract, joints can flex, right? So we understand what they mean because you're flexing your elbows, but muscles contract, joints flex. Y'all like my Drake meme, or was that like 10 years ago? Full stop. I don't even know what that means. I'm working on it. All right. Muscles influence motion through contraction. See, I might save that for Friday. I think this is a good slide. I don't want to go too, we only have a few minutes left, so I don't want to go into some of these analogies, but I will say, I will talk about this slide a little bit. You think about when you're relaxing, you're not working, but it's a technicality. Like your body's working, pumping blood, you have a resting metabolic rate. But what we consider doing a job is whatever your body does on top of that. Does that make sense? Like there's a reason you subtract your resting metabolic rate in ex-phys from your exercising metabolism. So it's the same with muscles. Like when we say our muscles are doing a job, that means they're contracting over what they were contracting at rest. Okay? So a muscle's function is all about its direction of pull. It has that 24/7 holidays and weekends. The direction of pull is always there, even at rest. But it's only considered contracting or doing a job if it's working above rest, if that makes sense. Just like, and you may be like, well, my job is to watch TV. God dog it. I meant like a typical job, right? Like if you're working construction, doing electric, like making things happen above rest, we'd call that a job. So it's very similar with muscles. Now, the reason I have this slide is job could be activities of daily living. The dishes, that's not going to get done by itself. That's work. Folding clothes, washing clothes, cleaning. So a job for a normal person, I say normal person, but like not a kid. I'm going to get to the kids. But like you're working when you're just doing stuff around your house. That's above rest. Older people, their job is to be able to do activities of daily living. That's above rest. Children, their job is to play and be kids. That's above rest. Okay. So I know I say like doing a job like, a carpenter or builder, but there's a lot of different kind of jobs that we do every day that still count as working above rest. Okay. So that's how we're going to do muscles. When we talk about muscles contracting, they're doing a job. They're working above rest to either prevent motion from happening, like your cervical extensors, the muscles that pull in the direction of cervical extension, are doing a job right now, keeping your head upright. And how do I know that? Because every now and then I'll see this happen. For the people viewing at home. Gravity is trying to flex your cervical vertebra because you got more stuff in the front of your neck or your spine than in the back. And so while gravity is trying to constantly do this, your extension pullers have to constantly be pulling back here to keep your eyes level, to keep your head upright. That's why like tension headaches and those things been working all day to keep your eyes level. They've been working isometrically. Who are those muscles? We'll get to them eventually in biomechanics: spinalis, iliocostalis, longissimus. You got little intrinsic rotaries. But for our class, we're just going to say how I know I need those muscles because I understand how they need to pull to do their job. Meaning, if gravity is trying to flex my neck, wouldn't I need muscles that are trying to extend my neck? To play teeter-totter, something's trying to do this, and if I don't want it to happen, I got to pull this way. So we're going to call those the cervical extension pullers, or the cervical extensors. That's the team name. That's the Chicago Bulls. It's the New Orleans Pelicans. It's the New Orleans Saints. And the individual muscles are the players. Does that make sense? The individual muscles are the Drew Brees and the Alvin Kamaras. And we're going to have superstars. You're going to have some superstar muscles. But they always have help. They always have players on the team. All right? I hope that was a good introduction. Does anybody, I promised y'all I would let it, do we have any exam 3 questions, maybe over the break? Some of you took a look at it. Anything? Bueller? All right, guys, welcome back. What's that? Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Very well done.